Hello everyone, this is Robert and this is the video I've been waiting to do. Now that the Bambu Lab H2D has been finally released, I can do a comparison between it and the Prusa XL. And in order to keep this video and comparison as unbiased as possible, I've actually declined the affiliate program for both Prusa and Bambu Labs. I have no financial stake in either of these companies. I do not care what you buy or if you buy anything. There are no affiliate links down below. That being said, let's get into the comparison. There's going to be a lot of information covered in this video, so please feel free to use the chapters to skip around. So the fine print. Bambu Lab did send me the H2D, the two AMSs, a box of filament, and also off camera I have the non-laser version of this printer as well. They sent this in exchange for general feedback, just seeing it getting used, and just some initial testing. There is no obligation to make this video or any other videos, and I'm not under any contract or agreements. Because I didn't sign up for Prusa or Bambu's affiliate program, I can say whatever I want and I can completely disparage both brands and products without any issue, which is wonderful. And because I don't have any affiliate links down below, I have no financial gain from either of these printers as well. They didn't pay me for doing this video, and I never accept payments for doing any kind of product reviews or comparisons. So that being said, my point in doing this video is just to compare these two different printers. They are the most popular multi-head printers on the market right now, and they are very similar, but they also have a lot of differences. So I want to cover everything from print quality, how they handle multi-material, and just kind of the basic features and specs. So that's what I'm going to be doing in this video. So let's start out by just covering the basic specs and features of these two printers. So let's compare the features and specs between these two machines. I've tried to kind of boil it all down into just a simple little sheet, and I'll throw that up on the screen occasionally. I have my little cheat sheet down here. And we're going to start with the elephant in the room, which is price. There's a significant price difference between these two machines. The XL comes in a lot of different configurations, and I kind of have a couple different options down here on this spreadsheet. But if we look at this configuration, which is 5 tool heads assembled with the enclosure, you're looking at about $4,500 for the base machine, but then you're also going to have about $400 of shipping, and then you're also going to have import duties. Keep in mind that is also with no extra build plate and with the brass nozzles, so that will be an additional upgrade if you want to go to hardened nozzles or high flow or get a secondary build plate. As mine is currently spec'd out right here with the hardened nozzles and the build plate, you're looking at about $5,400 with shipping and import duties. If you look at this machine in just the 2 tool head configuration, it's about $3,500 assembled with the enclosure, but none of those extras, and then you have to add on shipping and import duties. So just go to Prusa's website and configure a lot of different options, but don't forget about shipping and don't forget about import duties, because those will add up. Now, if we look at the H2D, it also has a lot of different configurations, but for the scope of this video, I'm not going to be talking about the laser versions. I'm only going to be discussing the non-laser version. The base price of that unit is $1,900, and then when you add in the AMS2, that comes to $2,200. Presumably these are going to be shipped from the US warehouse, so it's either going to be free shipping or relatively minimal fee, maybe called $100. You can go on Bambu's website, add it to your cart, and see what the shipping costs are going to be when they actually have it on the site. But it's a pretty substantial price difference between these two, especially if you consider adding on extra AMSs. You might be looking at $2,500 to maybe $3,000 if you get a bunch of extra AMS, versus something like the XL. You're going to be at a baseline of about $3,000 for like the 2 tool head, and you're going to easily get up to like $5,000 to $5,500 with all the taxes, import duties, and shipping costs. So pretty significant difference between the two. The next big difference between these two machines is the build volume. For the XL, it's pretty straightforward. You have a 360 millimeter cube build volume, and all the tool heads can access the entirety of that volume. It's a little bit different with the Bambu because you have these offset nozzles, so the leftmost nozzle can't get all the way to the right, and the rightmost nozzle can't get all the way over to the left. So even though the build plate is 350 by 320 by 325, a single nozzle can only access 25 millimeters less than that, or 325 by 320 by 325, and the two nozzles combined can only do 300 by 320 by 325. Hopefully I got all that right. So that means that on the XL, the total build volume is about 46,000 cubic centimeters, whereas if you're using two nozzles on the H2D, you only really have access to about 31,000 cubic centimeters. But if you're using a single nozzle, that bumps up to about 33,000 cubic centimeters. So the build volume on the H2D is significantly less than the XL, and I know that's going to be disappointing for a lot of people. So all that being said, even though the XL does have a much larger build volume, it is also a much larger printer overall. The volume of the printer itself is about double that of the H2D if we don't factor in the external spools and we don't factor in the AMS units. And having owned the XL for about a year or so now, it is very difficult to find a home for because it is so large. On a 24-inch deep bench, it still kind of hangs over the edge a little bit, and it's hard to set anything on the side of it because you have all the spools of filament hanging off both sides. And then if you add in filament dryers, which it doesn't have, this thing ends up taking the whole workbench. The H2D is a lot more compact and easier to fit onto a workbench if that's important to you. So in terms of actual printing capabilities, they're fairly similar, but there's a couple things I wanted to point out. On the XL, you have a max extruder temperature of 290 degrees Celsius, but it's actually 350 degrees on the Bambu. They both have the same 120 degrees Celsius hotbed temperature, but there's a little bit difference in the nozzles. Both of them come with a high flow version, but on the XL, it comes standard only with the brass nozzles. So if you want to get a hardened nozzle, that has an additional cost. And if you want to get a high flow hardened nozzle, that's about $65 per nozzle. So it's going to be about $350 in optional nozzles if you just want to get this to a hardened high flow version. The Bambu also has a high flow, which I haven't had the ability to test yet, but I can say that the high flow XL nozzle still doesn't achieve the flow rate of the standard Bambu. The Bambu is always going to win the speed and the flow test, and it costs extra money to get the XL up to that level. That being said, on the temperature range, I don't think this is really going to open up new filament options for you. Even though the XL is only at 290 and we go up to 350, you really have to get above 350 to start printing out things like PEEK or PEI or things like that. So unfortunately, the extra temperature is more just headroom on the H2D. It doesn't allow you to print things that would be otherwise unprintable on the XL, but having that extra 60-degree headroom might be nice for some people. However, in terms of printing capabilities, there is one big difference between these two machines, and that is the enclosures. On the XL, you have an optional enclosure and then also an optional air filtration unit that sits on the back. When you get both of those installed on the machine, you still don't really get temperature control. You can use the heated bed to heat up the temperature inside the chamber, but you have no real control over this. Even using a 100 degrees Celsius heated bed, I've found you can really only get up to about 29 or 30 degrees Celsius, and the fan on the back is mostly just used for fume extraction. So with PLA, I still have to open up the lid or pull down the accordion to get the temperatures to decrease to the level so I don't risk any heat creep. There is no active temperature control. You don't set this in the slicer, you don't set it in the menu, it just kind of filters out some of the smell occasionally and lets the air kind of get up to some amount of temperature inside. However, on the H2D, you have a true temperature-controlled chamber. You can get up to 65 degrees Celsius, and it has fans that can cool it down. So if you have a filament that needs to print in a hotter chamber, you can use the active heater to raise that temperature up, or if you have a filament like PLA that wants to print in a cooler environment, you can use the chamber to cool that down. And all of this is easily controlled through the touchscreen or in the slicer. It works seamlessly, it works automatically. In addition to that, it also has really good air filtration. On the Prusa, you just have a fan in the back with like a little tiny filter on it, but in the Bambu H2D, you actually have legitimate HEPA filters. You have a G3 rated pre-filter and also an H12 HEPA filter, and these can be changed out. On the XL, the air filtration has no ratings or specifications, and it's not surprising considering the amount of gaps in the enclosure. Additionally, it's located behind the unit, requires a little bit of disassembly to access. You have to pull the whole machine out if you want to swap it, and the whole thing just feels like an afterthought. So there are a few more things I want to mention in the features and specs between these two machines, most notably the camera. The XL does not have any camera. You can't view anything. There is an optional one, but it's really not all that great. And on the H2D, you of course have 4 separate cameras. The caveat with that is only one of the cameras is a live view camera. The other 3 are used for the printer itself. I was really bummed to see that you couldn't actually view the nozzle camera, but I have talked with Bambu about this, and they are hopefully planning to release this as something that you can actually view, because I think that's the best way to tell if you're actually extruding filament properly. Other features, the XL does have an Ethernet port if that's something of importance to you, and it also has that segmented bed, which is going to be a lot better for power consumption. It doesn't have to heat up the whole bed, it can only heat up the tiles that it needs to. On the Bambu side, there are a lot of additional features, and I'm only mentioning some of them. Most notably, the Bambu has a much improved nozzle wiping system that I have found to be fantastic and flawless. The XL does not have anything for that, and many people, myself included, are coming up with our own little solutions, and it is absolutely necessary in a machine that has more than one nozzle. The XL does not address that. The Bambu does a fantastic job at that. Also, in addition to that, it has a nice 5-inch touchscreen. It has the closed loop servo motors, these really cool vibration damping feet. You can support up to 24 filaments with this thing. The AMSs have filament dryers in them, which is wonderful. And of course, we need to mention that you can add the optional laser and drag knife accessories to this as well, if that's something that interests you. So the first major difference that I noticed between the H2D and the XL is how they handle filament. With the XL, it's pretty straightforward. You have 5 individual tool heads, and each tool head can accommodate a single roll of filament. It's really that simple. However, the printer knows what it has loaded, but the slicer does not. The two of them don't communicate in any meaningful way. So if you have PLA on 1, PETG on 2, TPU on 3, you will have to manually set that in your slicer. And if you get it wrong and mix them up and send the print file over to the XL, you will get a little warning saying that there's a mismatch. So it would be really nice if those things talked, but they do not. The other downside to the way that the XL does it is because there is only one roll of filament on each individual tool head, you are limited to 5. You can't use the MMU, so you have a maximum of 5 different filaments that you can use. Another thing that I've noticed while using this is that it takes a fair amount of time to load and unload all 5 tool heads. You have to do it individually, so you have to wait for one to heat up, eject out the filament, then wait, then feed new filament in, wait for that to purge, and then go on to the next one. And I time this. It takes about 3 to 3.5 minutes depending on the material, and it can take 15 to 20 minutes if you are loading up all 5 tool heads. It might not seem like a lot, but it definitely takes a long time just standing there in front of the machine, whereas with the Bambu and the AMS, you basically just feed them all into the AMS and you're kind of done. It takes maybe a minute in total. The other downside to the XL is while the machine is running, you do not have access to any of the other spools. So if this is running and I want to grab this spool and put in one of my other printers, it's captive in there. It's loaded into a tool head, and the only way to get it out is to just cut the spool off and move it out. You have to wait till the printer is done before you can heat up that tool head and eject it out. That might seem like a minor thing, but I've run into this a dozen times over using this printer to where I have that one special filament loaded in from a previous job. I want to use it in one of my other printers, and I have to either just cut the filament and yank it out or wait till this is done. So something to consider. The H2D, on the other hand, is kind of different. It has the single tool head, but it has two nozzles on that tool head. You have the left and the right. The right is fixed, and the left moves up and down with the little shield underneath of it. And you can hook up AMSs to either side, either the left or the right, and they claim that you can have a total of 24 different filaments per printer. So that allows a lot more flexibility as opposed to the XL that can only do up to 5. But of course you run into the issue of having to have all the poop and the waste if you're using more than just 2 filaments, one left, one right. And I'll cover this more in the next section, which is multi-material. But how this handles filament is much different because of the AMSs. While this printer is running, you can simply open up the AMS and pull out any of the spools that aren't being currently used, slap new ones in, and it kind of works a bit independently of the printer, which is not how the XL works. Loading filament on this is much, much easier because you can just pop this up, put in the filament. You don't have to wait for it to fully go into the machine, purge out of the tool head. You don't need to worry about any of that. In addition, if you've ever used Bambu printers before, you know that the AMSs will auto-read if you have the RFID chips in there, or you can just manually set them on the printer, and then that information will read back into the slicer. So for doing relatively complicated multi-material prints, setting up the filament is much easier on the Bambu because I generally have to just grab a notebook and write down what's in every spool location here, bring it back, set it up in Prusa Slicer. With the Bambu, you just click the sync button and it syncs all that information back into the slicer. So that is much easier to handle. And of course, since you can do up to 24 different filaments and you can just kind of hot swap them, the filament management is much easier on the Bambu. Another thing that's worth mentioning is the filament visibility on both printers. So on the XL, when you manually load filament in, you select the filament type, and that is generally stored on the machine, and that is used when you slice a file to see if there's some mismatch in the filament types. However, I currently have, I think, 4 or 5 rolls of filament on here, and there's nowhere in the menu system that I can just say, show me all the filament types that are loaded. It knows, but there's no way to actually view it on the printer itself. You just kind of have to obviously look at the spools. But if you get them mismatched, like if I load ASA and select PLA, for example, you will have to physically unload it and reload it to reset that filament type, which I've run into a few times. If you make a mistake, it takes a little bit of time to correct it. However, on the H2D, it's a little bit different. It uses the same kind of AMS setup that their other printers have, where you can go into the touch panel and visually see all of the filament that is loaded in every single spot. You can even set the color. If it has the Bambu RFID tag, it will automatically read that, automatically read the type of filament, the PLA basic versus PLA matte, things like that. On the Prusa, it's much more limited, and I did find in a few cases where my exact filament type wasn't on the list because that list isn't super exhaustive. So I was using PAHT. They don't specifically have that, so I used PA instead, which is close enough. But something like PETG carbon fiber is slightly different than PETG. So the printer thinks it's PETG. It's technically PETG carbon fiber, and they do have slightly different temperature ranges. So it's just something to keep in mind. The visibility of being able to see exactly what is loaded in the printer is much better on the Bambu, and it has a really slick interface for viewing all of that filament. And when you get up to 24 rolls of filament, I could see where that would be very necessary. With the XL, it's a little bit more straightforward. You can just kind of see what spools are loaded on the outside, but you kind of have to do a manual visual inspection for everything, and the colors and maybe the very specific type of filament is not loaded into the machine in any meaningful way. So let's talk about multi-material, because that's what both of these machines are designed to do. I could make probably a 2-hour video just talking about the differences between them, but I'm going to try and kind of condense this down. What they do the same. Both printers do a nozzle calibration really well. If you're dealing with two separate nozzles, you need to make sure that they can line up in exactly the same spot. The XL does this by installing a little pin in the middle of the print bed, and then it will sit there and probe against the side of the pin. The Bambu does something with its cameras to where it will visually print a pattern. It will look at it and then print it with the other nozzle. And I found in both cases, they work perfectly fine. There is no issues with the nozzle calibration. The XL does take a long time to do it, and it is much better done when the printer is brand new, because any little bit of filament specks on the nozzle will cause an error or a misalignment, and you have to do this every single time you swap the nozzles. So if you want to take out a brass nozzle and put a hardened nozzle in, you better make sure that that thing is heated up and sparkling brand new clean before you run through the alignment and the calibration. Whereas on the Bambu, it is a much simpler process because it is actually printing out material and using the vision system to get everything aligned. But the end result is perfectly fine on both, and once you get them aligned, it's not something you really have to do over again. Another similarity between these two printers is the amount of time it takes to switch from one filament to the other while printing. So let's say you have PLA and then support for PLA, and those are the only two filaments and you're switching between them. The time it takes is going to be roughly the same on both printers. In the case of the XL, it is going to drop off that tool head, grab the next tool head, purge some out, and then continue printing. Whereas with the Bambu, it basically raises or lowers the other respective nozzle, goes to the purge tower, and then keeps printing. It's about the same between the two. The Bambu is maybe a little bit quicker, but it's going to be a negligible amount of time in the whole scope of the 3D print. However, you will see this later, the Bambu is significantly faster in actual printing. And when you start going beyond 2 filaments and start adding a third, a fourth, a fifth, the XL will be faster. Of course, if you go beyond 5, the Bambu is going to be infinitely faster because you are strictly limited to 5 on the XL. So it really comes down to exactly what you're looking for in terms of multi-material. If you are going to be limited to only 2 different filament types, the Bambu is almost always going to be faster and have very minimal waste as long as you load everything appropriately in the left and the right nozzle. However, with the XL, once you start getting into 3, 4, or 5 filaments, it could end up being faster depending on what you are printing. And of course, there's going to be very minimal waste because it doesn't have to purge out the whole nozzle every single time when it switches back and forth. So let's talk about each printer's respective slicer and how it handles multi-material printing. For the scope of this video, I'm only going to be talking about native slicers, so Prusa Slicer and Bambu Studio. I do realize that for Prusa there are other options, not so much for Bambu. I'm curious to hear your thoughts and comments on that. Please comment down below. But I will say at this point in time, Prusa Slicer is much more mature for multi-material 3D printing. Obviously, the H2D just came out, and even though Bambu Studio has supported the AMS units for some time now, it really hasn't added in that feature set for true multi-material 3D printing. Most of it was just cosmetic. So even though you can like paint certain surfaces and things like that, it really doesn't have that functionality for true multi-material like Prusa Slicer has. Now, it's taken Prusa a while to get to that functionality. The 2 features I'm thinking of specifically are the ability to add a different material for infills and outer walls. That's something you can't currently do in Bambu Studio. However, this is a feature that I did request, and it is something that they're working on. In addition to that, the ability in Prusa Slicer to set kind of an interface between 2 different parts is really cool. Other than that, you can do most things between them. Neither of them really do different nozzle sizes well. A lot of people have suggested the ability to do like a 0.2 for the outer walls and like a 0.8 for the infill to speed everything up. That is not something that either of these really do right now. So expect there to be massive improvements coming in the next 3 to 6 months. I think Bambu's probably going to have more improvements. I would put money that in 3 months they're going to be about equal, but right now at the time of making this video, the edge definitely goes to Prusa Slicer for having more multi-material functionality in their slicer. So all that being said, both slicers are pretty intelligent enough to know the printing condition differences between different types of filaments. For instance, if you're printing one filament that has a really high bed temperature and doesn't like cooling, and let's say a high chamber temperature, and then you're using another material that's the exact opposite, both slicers will give you sufficient warnings that there might be problems. However, they will let you do certain things like print PLA on top of PETG and vice versa, which they won't stick, but in some cases that's actually what you want in using one for a support material for the other, things like that. So they both actually have enough logic to know that you might run into some printing issues, but not too much to where they prevent you from doing things that you might want to do. So let's compare some test prints. This is the Aero engine model from Prusa. This is actually scaled down 75% because I didn't want to spend that much time. Overall, they're both pretty good. It's a relatively easy model. The XL over here has that classic VFAs and ringing on the text, and you can see some color difference throughout. That is kind of inconsistent extrusion. The top is a little bit rougher and not kind of as pretty, and there's a little bit of stringing. There's really nothing wrong with the Bambu whatsoever. I don't see any ringing or ghosting down here. It's a little bit more matte. That's pretty typical to the Bambu profiles. But there's a little bit more of a story here. This ended up being a 46 meg file to slice on the XL, and it took a whopping 7 minutes to transfer. And when it was done transferring, the printer had actually locked up and required a reboot. And then I had to go through the whole thing again. This actually took about 25 minutes from when I sliced it to it started printing because I ran into a lot of issues. Overall print time on the XL, 21.5 hours, and on the Bambu, 15.5. So a significant time savings and also, I think, better quality overall. Next up, we have this detail preservation test. We have the H2D over here, the XL over there, and this file was provided by Bambu to show off their input shaping, and it shows quite a bit. If we look at it, there's a pattern on both sides. You can see nice clean edges, no issues there, no issues there, and the Bambu printed in 4 hours and 18 minutes. Looks pretty good. Now, if we look at the XL, it's very, very rough. There's a lot of inconsistent extrusion, a lot of gaps. If we look at the edges, you can see some problems. And on that side, you can see a lot of issues. Now, interesting thing about this is I saw it wasn't doing a very good job, and I decided to slow it down. So this middle band you see here, that's 50% speed. This whole thing took 6 hours and 14 minutes. If I didn't go down to 50% speed, this thing still would have taken 4 or 5 hours, and it just really didn't do a good job. And this is one of the things that I've been kind of talking about with my XL since I got it, is it really doesn't do a good job at this kind of thing. The input shaping really hurts it. It's trying to preserve all these details, but it ends up just doing really inconsistent, kind of nasty extrusion. This is a problem I've been dealing with ever since I got the printer, and there's just no good fix for it. So here's an interesting little vase model that I found on printables, and it is specifically designed to test for VFAs. And over here we have the H2D. This printed in 1 hour and 13 minutes. And these are actual print times. You can see it looks really nice. It's printed in vase mode, no problems, nice and clean. And then we look at the XL, and I'm not sure how much this is going to show up on camera, but it is all just waves and VFAs. Like, it is really, really wavy on there. And this one took 2.5 hours. So this took twice as long, and it is just all artifact and noise. So of course I wanted to test multi-material, so this model was printed on XL and H2D. This is 90A TPU. It's the same filament, just different color. I just wanted to print these at the same time, and both of them printed pretty well. This is a problematic model because as it prints and gets to this top, this will sit there and wobble, so you can see the top of the nozzles are a little bit wonky. I think it's maybe a little bit better on the Bambu than it is on the Prusa. Kind of got away from it a little bit, but both of them are perfectly functional, and the PAHT-CF bonded perfectly fine with the TPU. The one issue that I had is when I first started printing this on the Bambu, it was pretty rough. You see some large gaps down here. The filament is separating in a couple small areas, and this is due to the automatic pressure advance calibration that the Bambu does. This filament needs an insanely high pressure advance value, a K-factor value, and it wasn't properly calibrating that. So once I manually calibrated it, I got a really good print. But this is something that I've addressed with Bambu, and if you have a filament that needs a strange pressure advance value, or if it needs to be tuned, the Bambu won't always do a good job at that. The automatic calibration doesn't always come through, but once you calibrate it, it does work. But that's definitely one of the biggest downsides I've noticed on the new Bambu. So next up, I've got some structural prints. These are parts from my modular filament drawers. Up front, we have the H2D, and the XL is in back. This was a little over 2 hours, and this was a little over 3 hours, so about 50% longer for the XL. The main thing I'm looking for in this part is warping. You can see it lifts just ever so slightly. It has more material and heat on the edges, so it will tend to kind of warp a little bit. And if we look at the XL, there's quite a bit more warping. You can kind of tell that this is tacoed up quite a bit, and that was one of the parts that when I was printing these on the XL I noticed, is it just had a lot of warp and it printed a lot flatter on the Bambu. So that's something to keep in mind. And then I also have the rear pieces that I printed in PAHT-CF, and just by kind of feeling and looking at these, I can tell which one's which. This is the XL, this is the H2D, mostly based on that first layer. This one's fine textured. That's just some glue stick that was left on there, but looks really nice. And on the XL, you can see some rippling and waving. And this is an issue that at high temperatures, the load cell can't properly set that Z offset. And I've seen this issue before, that high temperatures, it just doesn't do as good of a job at probing the bed, so you get some weird squishing. And then also around here, there's just kind of some artifacts and some issues around the corners because it's printing over here, going over to here, printing, going back, going forth. And there are less of these issues on the H2D. This one also overall feels nice and smooth. This one feels very, very rough. You can just kind of feel all the fibers in it, and it just feels really rough. And lastly, the accuracy test. I printed out these rulers on both printers, and I was surprised. Both of these came out really nice and clean. I'm not sure if you can tell which one's which. The Bambu's on the bottom, the XL's on top. However, when you line them up, you can see that one of them is slightly longer than the other one. That is the XL. So of course I broke out the big old calipers measured at the 300 millimeter distance. The Bambu came out almost exactly 300. However, on the XL, it was about 0.6 millimeters off. So of course, I break out the cauliflowers. This is a model from Vector 3D to test skew and overall dimensional accuracy. And on the XL, I found that it was 0.2% off. So 0.2 over 300 millimeters is 0.6. So exactly confirms what I thought, but all of the dimensions on the H2D were pretty much spot on. The only issue that I noticed on the H2D, maybe I'll be able to show this, is you see in those corners, there's a little bit of gaps there. This is the pressure advance tuning. For both pressure advance and flow calibration, the automatic scripts don't really always do a perfect job, especially on more matte filaments like this. It ends up kind of leaving some gaps in places. So if you turn that off or calibrate it manually, everything ends up working out just fine. But dimensionally, the H2D is really, really accurate. So this video has been a ton of work, and I'm really regretting not having affiliate links down below. But I feel like the whole 3D printing community and content creator and influencer world has been very swayed by the amount of money being thrown around. There is a ton of money to make from a product launch like this, and I don't want to be influenced by whether you make the decision to buy this or not. I want to kind of back away from that and just let people make their own decisions without any financial benefit on myself. What I am asking is if you would please consider subscribing to my channel. That's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for views, I'm looking for subscriptions. I just do this as a hobby in my free time. I have a day job. This is just what I do for fun on the weekend, and a video like this takes a significant amount of several weekends. So that being said, I'm not going to make any decision for you. You can reach your own conclusions. I will sum this up in saying that the H2D is going to have better print quality. It's going to be faster. It's probably going to be more versatile in what it can do because of the chamber, the nozzle wipers, the AMSs, the filament dryers, all of the features. The XL does have 5 tool heads. So if there are instances where you need to use more than 2 tool heads, there could be less waste and there could be less time to print that model out just because it has the extra tool heads. It is also larger, but in terms of features, quality, frustration, having owned this for a year, it's a really difficult printer to own. I know a lot of people are happy with it, but in the forums, whenever someone says, oh, I love my XL, I always ask, let me show some prints that you like. Show me some of the things that you've printed that you are happy with. And they're always ringing and VFAs or relatively simplistic things. The Bambu just works, and I know that was Prusa's motto for a long time, but having owned this, it goes to Bambu. Bambu has just worked through this whole thing. I have run into no issues whatsoever with the nozzle swapping. The nozzle wiping is fantastic. It has done everything I've thrown at it. Over in the corner there, I have a whole new set of modular filament drawers. I've done 3 full spools of PAHT-CF in the last week. It's been flawless. It is really, truly fantastic. I know there is a lot of discussion between Prusa and Bambu and their company ethos. I'm not going to get into any of that. I am just going to simply say that these are tools. They're screwdrivers, they're drills, they're tools. I don't really care about anything beyond that. I can load filament into the Bambu, load my model into it, slice it, print it, and move on and get my project done. I don't really have any comment beyond that. In my day job, I am the CEO of a company that sells and manufactures embedded hardware, and I see absolutely nothing wrong with Bambu's terms and conditions and any of their policies. They are standard. So that being said, you can decide which one of these you want to go with, but I'll obviously be keeping the Bambu. It does what I want it to do. There may be use cases where you need the larger size, you need the extra tool heads, you need the extruders. I've got no horse in the race. You can do whatever you want. As always, thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Consider subscribing. Bye.